Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, we've got a new boss. Al Jazeera's Director General resigns.
I have completed my 8 years, and I think that is enough for any leader.
What will it mean for one of the world's most influential news organizations? Drug wars in Mexico, and a chilling warning for social media types there. Peru, the latest South American country with a right-left problem between the media and the powers that be. And saying goodbye to R.E.M. in our web video of the week.
It's been a bad day, please.
Doing a news program that focuses on the media and then covering a story on your own news organization comes with possible career implications. But there's no avoiding this one. The sudden and surprising resignation of Wada Kanfar, Al Jazeera's Director General and the network's figurehead, has all kinds of people asking questions. Those who watch the network are wondering if Kanfar's departure and his replacement by a member of the Qatari royal family, a non-journalist, signals a reining in of one of the most distinctive voices in the global media landscape. But Kanfar argues that you, the viewer, are the reason that that won't happen. That Al Jazeera's audience will not keep tuning in if the network changes its journalistic approach. Our starting point this week is a little close to home. It's the news of a change at the top at Al Jazeera's headquarters in Doha. The news was broken by Wada Kanfar himself via Twitter. After 8 years of service leading Al Jazeera, I have just announced that I am moving on. A news story delivered in 84 characters that instantly had others tweeting.
The first thing that went through my mind was, oh no, here's a guy that for the last 8 years has put Al Jazeera and its various properties and networks on the global map.
مدير شبكة الجزيرة وضح خنفر.
This was big news in the Arabic media space, which is hyper-competitive and opinionated. This London-based pan-Arab channel ran the story ahead of the protests in Yemen and Syria.
ولكن نبدأ متابعة لخبر استقالة وضاح خنفر من إدارة قناة الجزيرة.
This Egyptian talk show host sarcastically referred to Al Jazeera as the people who taught us democracy
وعلمونا الديمقراطية
and freedom of the press, and wondered what had happened to that.
قعدنا سنين طويلة جدا بنقول أمين. آن الأوان إن إحنا بس نسأل شوية أسئلة.
The initial rush of Western coverage, such as the New York Times, linked Wada Kanfar's resignation to a recent story about WikiLeaks and a U.S. diplomatic cable from 2005 that suggested Kanfar had toned down Al Jazeera's Iraq coverage after meeting with U.S. government officials. However, people familiar with the network say that theory is off the mark.
I think it's pretty much what is to be expected, because you're dealing with this extraordinary organization, Jazeera, that has provided the single most important political challenge to Western colonial domination, probably in the modern Arab world. So I think the speculation is normal given the nature of the personalities and the politics of the story.
If you actually read what was in the WikiLeaks cables, it's pretty clear that, for one thing, this kind of stuff where diplomats come and complain about news coverage happens all the time. It happens to us at Foreign Policy, and when we make a mistake, we'll fix it. That doesn't mean there's any kind of conspiracy.
I also believe that his departure is not connected to the WikiLeaks revelations. I don't believe that they really do show anything out of the ordinary. I also know it to be the case that discussions and ideas about Kanfar's departure long predated those very recent revelations from WikiLeaks.
Kanfar later tweeted he was entertained by all the rumors of why I have resigned, but he provided no specific reasons for leaving, just that it was time for a change. That fueled theories of a conflict between Kanfar and the network's owners, the Qatari royal family, which heard many complaints from Arab leaders over Al Jazeera's coverage of the Arab Spring. In an interview on Al Jazeera English, Kanfar maintained the network's coverage was not affected by that, not interfered with.
We have clear guidelines. We have code of ethics and code of conduct that continue to direct our editorial policy. Again, independence is the core value that Al Jazeera stood in this region for years, before the revolutions, before we saw Hosni Mubarak step down and Zain al-Abidin steps down. We stood up. Our people went to jail, and our bureaus were bombed by the Americans, and our journalists were detained by Arab authoritarian regimes. We never altered our editorial policy, and that is the greatest asset.
Kanfar was also queried about his successor.
Your replacement is a member of the Qatari ruling family. Do you think that's going to mean changes for Al Jazeera's coverage?
Sheikh Ahmed bin Jassim Al Thani is a member of the Qatari royal family, and the fact that he's not a journalist has the media world asking if his appointment means the end of the hard-charging journalism Al Jazeera has become known for.
I think it's perfectly normal to have some concerns at a very superficial level initially, but the responsible thing to do is let's judge people by what they actually do.
To have a member of the Qatari royal family as the Director General of Al Jazeera does certainly appear to show that the Emir is establishing a tighter control over the network. But at the same time, if the Qataris remain as sharp and as intelligent as they appear to be in what they do, they will understand that making Al Jazeera appear to be too subservient and would alienate and turn off the very large numbers of people in the Middle East and indeed around the world who see it as a very, very powerful and positive force for media freedom.
So we have to see what he does, and hopefully there will be sufficient accountability both from the top and from the bottom, from within the organization, from within the royal family, and from, most importantly, from society as a whole that demands good journalism.
That is precisely the point Wada Kanfar made, that the best guarantors of Al Jazeera's editorial independence are not in the boardroom or the newsroom. They are in the audience.
If Al Jazeera thinks that it could change its editorial policy, then our audience, which is very clever and politicized, will turn away from it. This is why Al Jazeera cannot do it. The audience are the security for our integrity and for our independence.
So, as they say in the news business, watch this space. And this one. That's what they'll be doing in the Arab street. They'll be tuning in a few palaces as well. Our Global Village Voices now on the future of Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera has always made the distinction that they are a state-owned operation, not state-run. With that said, my concern does not lie in whatever sort of bias that Al Jazeera may have incurred under outgoing news director Wada Kanfar's leadership, but rather in his successor, a Qatari royal who is also an executive at Qatar Gas. With this move in leadership, I am slightly concerned that Al Jazeera may be blurring the lines between state-owned and state-run.
What the Director General of Al Jazeera did was probably not that big of a deal. It does remind us that you can't just go to one place for news, and also news stations have a lot of pressure being put on them, whether it be from the sources of funding that they're getting, or from governments, or from their viewers itself.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Mexico is a bad place to have a byline, especially for journalists reporting on the country's drug wars. Now comes word of a gruesome double murder that was clearly meant to send a message. Using social media to report on that story can be deadly as well. Two mangled bodies were found hanging from a bridge in the city of Nuevo Laredo, near a sign that said, "Watch out, I've got my eye on you. This is going to happen to all of those posting silly things on the internet." It was signed with the letter Z, the symbol of the Los Zetas drug cartels. Over the past 5 years, at least 42 journalists have been killed in Mexico, most for reporting on the drug story. Many newspapers no longer publish pictures of murder victims or publish the threats that cartels issue against their rivals, the police, or the public. So some of that reporting has since moved to the web. Two of the most popular sites covering the story are Blog del Narco and Frontera al Rojo Vivo. Both were named on the sign right next to the bodies. The Iranian authorities have arrested 6 independent filmmakers, accusing them of collaborating with the British Broadcasting Corporation's Persian language service. The BBC's Persian service is blocked in Iran, but many Iranians access the channel through satellite dishes, even though they're illegal. The channel was one of the foreign news outlets blamed by the Iranian leadership for stirring up trouble in the aftermath of the 2009 elections. The filmmakers have been accused of supplying information and video footage that the authorities say misrepresented Iran. Iran's Young Journalists Club, a state-run organization, quoted an unnamed source as saying this network of anti-Iran people were collaborating with the BBC to fulfill the needs of the British Secret Service in exchange for big sums of money. The anti-Iran intentions of the channel and its collaborators are clear. The head of BBC Persian, Sadek Sabah, denied that, saying the people said to be arrested have no connection to the channel, and that although we have shown films belonging to some of them after buying rights, that the BBC has no official or unofficial collaborators. The Committee to Protect Journalists is blaming WikiLeaks after a reporter named in an unredacted U.S. diplomatic cable fled Ethiopia, reportedly out of fear for his life. The journalist is Araga Ashine, a correspondent with the Nation Media Group. The CPJ reported on its site that Ashine said he was told by police to divulge the name of a source referred to in a 2009 cable who had warned him that the government was about to clamp down on an independent newspaper. The CPJ went on to say that Ashine fled the country and has asked that his location not be revealed for reasons of safety. CPJ Executive Director Joel Simon said WikiLeaks must take responsibility for its actions and do whatever it can to reduce the risk to journalists named in its cables. It must put in place systems to ensure that such disclosures do not reoccur. WikiLeaks disagrees with the CPJ's characterization of what happened. While it is outrageous for a journalist to feel the need to leave their country, the organization said, neither is it good for the CPJ to distort the facts for marketing purposes. A Russian newspaper owner has broken one of the main rules of journalism. Report the story, don't become the story. Alexander Lebedyev, the owner of newspapers in Russia and in the UK, was taking part in a discussion on the global financial crisis on the Russian channel NTV. Lebedyev was joined by an outspoken property tycoon, Simon Polonsky, who made the mistake of goading Lebedyev, who's a former KGB operative. After things settled down, Lebedyev said, in a critical situation, there is no choice. I see no reason to be hit with the first shot. I neutralized him. One of the show's hosts, Yekaterina Gordeyeva, observed, you know, things are not going well when the oligarchs are fighting. They're calling it the pink tide, Latin America's move to the political left. Over the past decade or so, voters in the region have elected liberal leaders from Venezuela to Brazil and a few countries in between. Those leaders have come to power despite the best efforts of many a right-wing media outlet, and the South American airwaves have been resonating with the sound of ideological conflict. The most recent example of that has come in Peru with the election of the left-leaning Ollanta Humala in June. During that campaign, Peru's most powerful media group, El Comercio, sided with Humala's rival, Keiko Fujimori. But now that he's in office, can Humala and his opponents in the media get along? The Listening Post's Marcela Pizarro now on the ongoing tension between the right-wing media establishment in Peru and the new left-wing government.
Ollanta Humala on the day he became Peru's new president. Clearly a big media moment. But in this story, much of the media would have preferred another result. And almost succeeded.
The most powerful media supported Keiko Fujimori, and they didn't even hide it. It was a very public discussion among the mainstream press.
Even during his inauguration, when he promised to protect the freedom of the press, one TV channel, part of Peru's biggest media group, dropped live coverage of the speech. For Peruvians, it was another example of the antagonistic relationship their new leftist leader has with the country's mostly right-wing media.
The general opinion of the consumer, of the citizen, is that the campaign wasn't an attractive campaign. Issues weren't debated, and basically all you had was one side attacking the other. That led to a very ugly campaign.
And Fritz Dubois should know. He's part of the media group accused of the most skewed coverage, El Comercio.
The coverage was excessively biased. not just El Comercio, but there's no doubt that El Comercio was more so, giving its importance because of its national audience.
En la audiencia nacional.
At the end, I mean, everybody complains about El Comercio because basically we are the largest group in the country. But all newspapers took sides. There are some other newspapers who never ever reported anything in favor of the country they were actually opposing. At least we were trying to be kind of objective. So, I mean, we weren't the main culprits.
El Comercio owns 4 newspapers, El Comercio, Peru 21, Tromé and La Gestión, and 2 TV channels, Canal N and América Televisión.
El Comercio is a powerful, almost monopolistic media group in Peru that has always and consistently placed itself on the right of Peruvian politics. In this sense, the 2011 election was no exception.
El Comercio coverage of the campaign was so partisan, it caused internal divisions at the company. One longtime editor, who helped launch El Comercio's Canal N 12 years ago, was fired mid-campaign for what she called political reasons.
What happened with me was the best example of what everyone already knew, that there was a media attempt on the part of El Comercio for Keiko to win the elections. They started asking us to cover Humala less than Keiko, and basically to scaremonger. They said they had the right to support a candidate. They're right, but that's what editorials are for, not news.
Patricia fue llamada hoy por el jefe personal y despedida sin causa alguna. 12 años de abnegados servicios no van a terminar así.
Rosa María Palacios is one of Peru's most respected investigative journalists. She lost her job at another El Comercio channel in the aftermath of the election. Her contract was not renewed.
When they fired Rosa María Palacios from America Television after the elections, the criticism was all played out on the social media. Everyone criticized America Television directly and demanded explanations from the directors.
I think El Comercio will not replace Rosa María Palacios in the sense that I don't think they will repeat the experience of a truly independent, an outspoken journalist. I think they will prefer much tamer journalists like the ones they have in El Comercio, for instance.
El Comercio may well have dropped several journalists. But then one journalist dropped El Comercio. And he was a little hard to ignore. Mario Vargas Llosa, one of Latin America's most renowned intellectuals, had been writing for El Comercio for years.
El Comercio, que tuvo una actitud.
The editorial line at El Comercio was tilted towards preventing Humala's victory, to the point that the Nobel laureate Mario Vargas Llosa decided he did not want to be associated with El Comercio, and so he withdrew.
Vargas Llosa put it this way: I cannot permit my column Touchstone to continue to be published in a caricature of what should be a genuinely free, plural and democratic organ. Peru's media story is not unique. Across Latin America, in country after country, there's a pattern in which privately owned right-wing media groups are waging wars against new left-wing governments. It's happened in Venezuela with President Hugo Chavez.
Y los medios de comunicación en primera línea, llamando al golpe. Algunos siguen haciéndolo.
In Bolivia with Evo Morales.
No me va a callar. Tengo derecho a defenderme frente a las humillaciones, a las ofensas de algunos medios de comunicación.
In Ecuador with Rafael Correa.
Para que venga un descalificado a decir que yo ordené asesinar y disparar a discreción y sin previo aviso contra un hospital lleno de civiles. Es su opinión. Tengan algo de sentido de autocrítica, por Dios.
In Argentina, with the Kirchners.
La desmonopolización va a convertir en negocio a muchas pymes y pequeñas empresas que no pueden hacerlo porque muchas veces no pueden competir con el monopolio.
And in Brazil, with recently elected President Dilma Rousseff.
A candidata a presidente da República não é candidata aeromoça.
Ollanta Humala was up against those same kinds of media forces in Peru. It took him 2 elections to overcome that and gain power. The standoff between these leaders and big media groups in Peru and around Latin America continues.
A country with very weak institutions like Peru or Ecuador or Venezuela or Argentina, you go to any Latin American country, if the press doesn't actually can freely work in those societies, then you have all the ingredients for a dictatorship.
The question is, will Humala be able to survive on this hostile media terrain?
Es decir, nosotros así como
We've criticized El Comercio, but we will also defend it if there is any type of authoritarian attitude from the government. It's going to be a very tense relationship between the government and the media.
este gobierno y los medios.
One of the things media owners and journalists like the most is to cry wolf all the time.
No soportan la diferencia de opinión, la crítica, no soportan las posiciones distintas.
The media don't know very well how to handle the government yet, and this also goes for the government vis-à-vis the media, yes. It's definitely not a marriage made in heaven.
More Global Village Voices now on the state of political journalism in Peru.
The main counterbalance to El Comercio came from Diario La República, it's a left-leaning newspaper published in Lima, but it has a much smaller circulation than El Comercio. A lot of the articles that came out in La República were bounced in social media, so this allowed them to have a multiplying effect and be read, have a much wider audience. So the social media started being the space where most of the debate was happening.
There was certainly some bias among both right-wing and left-wing media in Peru during the elections, but it seems to me that the bias among the right-wing media was more systematic. And I think it was particularly worrying to many observers to see that El Comercio, a newspaper usually known for its objectivity in reporting on political affairs, took a pretty radical anti-Humala stance during the elections.
Finally, it's the end of the world, as R.E.M. fans know it. One of America's greatest bands is splitting up. R.E.M. made the announcement in a typically low-key way. No fanfare, just a brief note on their website. R.E.M. came out of Athens, Georgia back in 1981 and over 3 decades recorded 15 albums selling something like 70 million units. And their greatest accomplishment may have been that no one ever accused them of selling out. R.E.M.'s very first single had a Cold War media theme to it. It was called Radio Free Europe. Our web video of the week is one of their lesser-known tracks. R.E.M. impersonating a TV news team having a bad day. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
A public service announcement followed me home the other day. I paid it, never mind. Go away. It's so thick you can stir with a stick. Free Teflon, whitewash presidency. We're sick of being jerked around. Wear that on your sleeve. Broadcast me a joyful noise into the times. Lord, count your blessings. We're sick of being jerked around. We all fall down. Have you ever seen the televising brightest subcommittee prize investigation dance? Those ants and pants glances right look behind the eyes. It's a hallowed hollow anesthetized. Save my own, screw these guys. Smoke and mirror lock down. Broadcast me a joyful noise into the times. Lord, count your blessings. The papers wouldn't lie. I sign not one more. It's been a bad day. Please don't take a picture. It's been a bad day. Please. It's been a bad day. Please don't take a picture. It's been a bad day. Please. We're dug in deep. The price is steep. The auctioneer is such a creep. The lights went out, the orange dry. We blamed it on the other guy. Sure, all men are created equal. Here's the church, here's the steeple. Please stay tuned, we cut to sequel. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down.